broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wills.
Hello everyone and welcome to the midweek edition of WilmsFront. Today is Wednesday the 26th of August 2020. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels, back on DLive tonight, and also as always on the Entropy Enhanced software. I've put the link into both the YouTube and DLive live chats for you to participate in tonight's show. It is 7 p.m. here in lockdown Victoria, where we have been living under a state of emergency since March 16th. But the 6-month limit to this state of emergency under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act 2008 will expire when the stage 4 lockdown ends on September 13th. Premier/dictator Dan Andrews on Monday announced he was seeking a 12-month extension to his and the Chief Health Officer's use of the state of emergency powers, which would need to pass both houses of the Victorian Parliament, which actually hasn't sat since May. Daniel Andrews' pitch for keeping these powers at his disposal for 12 months longer was that it's the only way to make sure COVID-safe measures could continue during the economic reopening process, as he puts it. Victorians have reacted with anger and alarm to the potential extension of these powers that will allow Dan and his Chief Health Officer, Dr. Brett Sutton, to plunge the state back into lockdown at any moment in the next 12 months if they believe daily new virus case numbers are too high. The Liberal Party came out on Monday afternoon to make it clear they would oppose the Premier's power grab. Obviously, Dan's Labor Party has a majority in the lower house in the Legislative Assembly, but in the proportionally representative upper house, the Legislative Council, the government needs 4 out of the 12 crossbenchers to make this 12-month extension law. Immediately on Monday afternoon, members of the crossbench were inundated with emails and calls from Victorians asking them to vote no. The 2 Liberal Democrat MLCs said right from the beginning they would be voting no. Other members of the crossbench, such as Fiona Patten from the Reason Party and the 2 MLCs from Darren Hinch's Justice Party, stated they would vote no only to the 12-month extension, which doesn't include scrutiny by the Parliament. The most likely compromise will be reached with enough crossbench support so Dan can get his wish to be able to continue decreeing coronavirus restrictions using the state of emergency powers. We shall see how this power play plays out next week when the Victorian Parliament intends to sit. In response to the backlash to his power extension push, Dan at his press conferences the past couple of days has talked up the reopening and rebuilding process post the lockdown. The new daily case numbers and total active case numbers continue to go down. Last 3 days, new daily cases have been less than 150 and active cases are now less than 3,500, which is less than half of their peak just over a week ago. Although Victorians and especially Melburnians have suffered the worst under this second wave with stay-at-home orders, business closures, curfews and face-covering mandates, things are still not back to normal in the other states and territories. Every state and territory has closed its borders in some way, tearing border communities apart, denying them services, education and healthcare. For farmers and goods transporters across state lines, it's been a logistical and bureaucratic nightmare. The most heartbreaking stories are those denied entry permits to say goodbye to loved ones who are terminally ill or have already passed away. It's not just Victorians who've been plunged back into draconian lockdowns. The City of Auckland in New Zealand is still on alert level 3 lockdown that began 2 weeks ago after a new cluster of cases was discovered there. And last Saturday, Queensland Premier Annastasia announced a mini lockdown in South-East Queensland with immediate effect after an outbreak at a local youth detention centre with private and outdoor gatherings limited to just 10 people. She is facing a state election on October 31st, and it looks like she's prepared to enact any measure that would help her claim during the election campaign she's kept coronavirus largely out of Queensland. There's a large and growing pro-freedom and anti-lockdown movement right throughout Australia. A prominent voice for freedom in South-East Queensland is Matt Rosengarten, who runs the multi-platform news outlet The Truth and Freedom Report. He's been out covering the recent pro-freedom rallies in the area, and it's my pleasure to introduce him to our audience tonight. Matt, welcome to WilmsFront.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone. Yeah, let's get stuck into it.
Well, you've actually on your Facebook listed that you are a native Melburnian. Obviously, a lot of people watching from Melbourne would say you got out at the right time. You're semi-free. We in Melbourne would crave to have the even just the reduced freedom that Queenslanders and New South Welshmen have.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So obviously, I spent the first 30 years of my life in Melbourne, so I know obviously it's. Oh, look, whether I lived there or not, it would be the same. I think I'd be feeling the same sort of compassion and empathy for all of you guys down there. But obviously, I do have a lot of family and friends down there as well, so that does add, I suppose, an extra layer. But yeah, obviously, I know Melbourne well, and I really feel for you. And but you know, I think we've seen at the rallies in Gold Coast and Brisbane that there's a really, really strong support up here in Queensland for our fellow Australians down in Melbourne, and obviously, you know, there's those sort of sentiments are shared Australia-wide, I would have thought. Yeah.
Because we are all Australians. Australia is the nation. We're a commonwealth. We are a collection of states, but it seems and I mentioned in my introduction, all these border closures. We need to take a step back and consider, are we all Australians, or are we all basically separate countries now? And that's why it was so great. It was called the Gold Coast Freedom Community Rally on August 15th. That was organised by Dave Oneegs. Most of you will have seen him doing regular live streams with the local 99% Unite leaders down here in Melbourne, Fanos and Raphael. And also one of the speakers there was Max Igan from the Crowhouse. It was quite surreal to see him in the flesh after seeing him on the screen for so many years. I had him on my show back when the lockdown was first introduced. Subsequently, he's been banned from YouTube. He's still posting regularly up on BitChute, the free speech video hosting site, and you live stream that to your Facebook profile, which is how I first came across you. It was certainly great. Well, for us in Melbourne, who it's illegal to protest, it was great to see a demonstration of community views.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, yeah. Look, it was a great day. I certainly agree. It was quite great to see Max in the flesh. Obviously, he doesn't live far away from here. I was aware of that, but still, I wasn't aware that he was coming down. So that was certainly, I think it was a bit of a boon for everyone there. I think he's obviously a very well-known figure in the movement. He's you know, look, I don't necessarily agree with every single word that he says, but I have a great deal of respect for Max. He's obviously, you know, I can say that he's woken up perhaps more people in Australia than any other Australian. I think that goes without saying. He's obviously got hundreds of thousands of followers, and I think he's done an amazing job in sharing information. I can say that I personally came across him. He was one of the first people I came across maybe back in 2007, 2008, when he was at a little radio show on American, I think it was Freedom Voice Radio, whatever it was. And he obviously opened my eyes to a lot of things. So I certainly pay respect to that. And it was great to see him there. And look, it was a great event. There was definitely a feeling of solidarity. I really agree with you, Tim. We are all Australians. And I know it seems a little bit as if the states have sort of gone on their own here, and
well,
yeah,
it's the state governments that have, not the people.
Very, very, very true. Very well said. That's exactly right, and that's what I was getting at, because you know, I don't think. Look, I don't want to get too much into the legal aspect or whatever, but you know, it's been my view and it's been my argument. You know, drawing on what some experts have said, and I've had some discussions, in particular with RJ Martin. Some of your viewers may or may not have seen the interview I did with RJ on Friday from the Southport District Court, where he was arguing his case against, or basically submitting that the COVID-19 directives here in Queensland are not legal for a number of reasons. And I've learned a lot from RJ, and I will refer to him here as a man who has a Juris Doctor and a thorough understanding of the
law degree, to explain for the audience.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a postgraduate law degree. And he's obviously the founder of the Reset Parliament Party here in Queensland. Now, we've had a discussion about the legality of the directives. In terms of, just because you mentioned the states and going, you know, in different ways, just for an example, and we'll probably talk a little bit about the Constitution a bit later, but, you know, Section 69 of the Constitution, you know, states don't have quarantine powers.
No.
You know, that's federal powers. So just an example of how, you know, it's a little bit surreal, a little bit strange to see, you know, state premiers seemingly acting outside of their powers.
Well, I've mainly been focusing on Section 92 of the Constitution, which says that trade, commerce and intercourse between the states should be absolutely free. And I had on my Saturday night Northern Territory election night live stream an actual Australian constitutional scholar in Professor David Flint, and I asked him what the legal definition of intercourse was, and it's basically just people meeting associated between the states. So I asked him, for example, there's been a lot of focus on the twin cities in New South Wales, Queensland, Tweed Heads and Coolangatta. And so I asked him, is going for a surf from Tweed Heads to Coolangatta, would that be intercourse covered under that section of the Constitution? And he said, yes. And there's only one challenge to the state border closures under Section 92 that's before the courts. That's business mining magnate Queenslander Clive Palmer. The federal court, they ruled on Tuesday supporting WA's hard border closure because he was denied an entry permit to WA. That's what triggered this process. But it's been referred to the High Court. They are the ultimate arbiters of the Australian Constitution, and they have a long history of strictly interpreting the Australian Constitution to the letter of the law. They're not swayed by any potential mass fallout, as was displayed during the dual citizenship crisis of the last parliament, which caused numerous by-elections that didn't sway their opinion. They still ruled to the Constitution. So we certainly hope in this situation that's what they find.
Indeed. And, you know, speaking about the High Court and, you know, sticking to the letter of the law. Now, the Constitution, as you say, as correctly say, in section, I think it was 92, was it that you said? Yeah. Travel between the states. Now, it does not say in the Constitution, except in the case of a pandemic or a health emergency, it doesn't say that. So now, one could argue that it's possible the Constitution could be interpreted. Perhaps there have been, you know, talks about, you know, perhaps in a situation where it was in the national defence, if we were at war or something like that.
Yeah, there is a caveat there, but we've seen these border closures drag on, and especially with the Queensland-New South Wales border. I mean, New South Wales new daily cases are still in the single digits. That to my way of thinking, and I'm not the High Court, but that doesn't seem proportionate.
Oh, it's absolutely ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense at all. But that's, you know, you could say that about a lot of things that have happened over the last few months. So it's really hard to even have a reference point. You know, even if you're going to make the decision to announce that Sydney's a hotspot, I mean, you know, that's a big call in itself. But, you know, that's 1,000 kilometres away from here, you know. So as you say, building an imaginary wall through the middle of Tweedheads, Coolangatta, which is, as you correctly point out, it's really just one town. I mean, you know, I lived in Tweedheads for years, and you know, I several times a week would cross the border. Now, I should say that there is an allowance. There is sort of a border zone, and it's not impossible to cross the border. But you know, obviously, you need to get your pass organised and have a valid reason, and you can only stay for specific reasons and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, as you say, it just seems to be completely. I can't get my head around how it makes any sense and how it could really, I mean, to make such a drastic, let's just say, like, we are literally, this is not in accordance with our constitution. So it has to be really an extreme situation to even talk about that. And it still requires the High Court to interpret it that way, mind you. It's not up for the Queensland Premier or the Victoria Premier or anyone like that to say, I'm going to interpret the Constitution this way because it's a pandemic. Sorry, no. If you want to interpret that way, that needs to be done by the High Court. If you want to change the Constitution to allow for that, we need a referendum. You don't just go and make state legislation and say that a pandemic overrules it because I said so. That's just not all.
Annastasia Palaszczuk, she shut the New South Wales Queensland border during the first lockdown. It reopened when the first wave was over, but as the second wave began to really swamp Victoria, and there was that inevitable spillover with New South Wales, that's when she put up the borders again. So there's been 2 border closure waves, and obviously if you're a business in that border region, and well, especially a tourist operator there, I'm not sure how deep your roots go into the Gold Coast, South-East Queensland community now that you've heard feedback from business owners.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, I've seen it with my own eyes. I mean, even, you know, some like restaurants and things like that. Coolangatta is it's a holiday spot, you know, and it's an area with, you know, night spots and restaurants and things like that. So you can see with your own eyes when you go down to Coolangatta how many businesses have closed and, you know, have clearly been affected. Restaurants in the area have closed. I mean, you know, you've got a big part of their market coming from the other side of the border that can't get across. And you know, it's just decimated business on the border. I mean, you don't even need to speak directly to people, although I have spoken to a few who have expressed that to me, but you can see with your own eyes, it's clear as that.
And
it's very sad. When
some of the conservative personalities on the news talk about reopening borders so the tourists can come back in, my thought is, which tourists have got money anymore? A lot of them have lost their jobs. They're not going to be able to, when the borders are open, afford a holiday. The tourist dollar after this isn't going to be as nowhere near as strong as it was before. This is what we'll get into later. The economy doesn't just get back to normal when the borders open, when Victoria's lockdown is over. The after devastation is only just beginning.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, look, you know, time's only going to tell as to the run-on effects. But yeah, it's very sad. I personally just feel that it's just terribly sad to see. And you know, the people who express views along the lines of, you know, it's you know, if you're talking about saving the economy, then that means you're selfish or you don't care about people's safety or health or lives or whatever like that. And I just find this to be just an absolutely, it's just not a reasonable argument. It's not a well thought through argument, okay? Because, you know, these actions are destroying lives. The collateral damage, you've got to weigh it up. I know it's hard. I'm not for a second saying that I don't care about the health and well-being of our elderly population or our immunocompromised people who may be more susceptible to this virus, which seems to me to be roughly on par with, other viruses that go around at this time of the year. I sympathise and empathise a lot. And I'm so sorry for the loss of those few people in this country who perhaps may have lost someone to this virus. But sometimes when it comes to running a country, you've got to make some difficult decisions and you've got to weigh up conflicting interests, okay? And you've got to consider the collateral damage of what you're doing. So yes, you could argue that these lockdowns are preventing the spread. It's arguable. I'm not sure that it's for sure. I don't think you can prove that that's true, but you could certainly argue that case. But you've got to acknowledge the fact that undoubtedly there's been 3 or 4 times more people suicide as a direct result of the lockdown than who have died allegedly directly from the COVID-19 virus. And we just can't ignore that. And it's shocking to me that people won't even consider. Obviously, some people consider it, but it doesn't really get spoken about and included in the conversation, and what it means to destroy a small business who's built it up with 30, 40 years of blood, sweat and tears and invested their entire life savings into building a business that just gets destroyed overnight because a virus can exist and be spread in a small mum and pop shop, but not in Bunnings or Coles. It just beggars belief.
It's starting to get a bit more attention now, rightly so. The mental health impacts of the lockdowns and those whose businesses and jobs will not survive. And I've long said that there needs to be a lockdown death toll that is calculated as well, because the singular focus of all the health professionals who have an input into the government decision making is that we have to prevent COVID-19's death. It's a singular narrow focus when there's so many more other considerations that you have to make. And with this, obviously, with the first lockdown, there was a lot of people sort of like, oh, this is a bit different, where we'll help contain the virus. We'll just live a bit differently. But when Melbourne and then the rest of Victoria was plunged back into lockdown, there was a real demoralization because we thought that we were on the path to reopening and it was just all shut down again. And then we had the face covering mandate, which wasn't in the first lockdown. And then, of course, the curfew. It's called lockdown fatigue. That's what it's called. But it's more lockdown demoralization because people are just losing hope about the future, even those who obviously have jobs, because they can't see their friends and families. They're only allowed out for exercise 1 hour a day. That whole social aspect of life is dead.
It's distressing, honestly. It's distressing for me to watch. I mean, as I say, I'm obviously in contact with my old friends and family there, but I've obviously got hundreds of Facebook friends as well in Melbourne who tell the story as well. But, I can hear the demoralisation and the pain and suffering in the voice when I speak to my, family every now and again, and they tell me what's going on there. And it's just, I just feel that, there's just an element of disingenuity, okay? I don't want to, it just seems in the climate now that if you just question anything, people will just jump on you and label you as some sort of conspiracy theorist or something. If you even just question, anything that we're being just bombarded with in the mainstream media, and it's not the right approach. I've been saying since the start, since March, I've been calling out, first and foremost, for open public debate. And it seems to me that's been missing. Maybe just now, maybe in the last few weeks, I've noticed, obviously, Sky's starting to report something a little bit closer to what I would consider to be about a bit of a balanced view about what's happening. I don't generally, think that the mainstream media are doing a particularly good job in general, but at least there's some sort of debate going on in the public as at the beginning, it was just squashed completely. And it's very sad to see. I mean, 1 hour a day. I mean, this is just like being in prison.
Well,
And
it's worse than prison, because in our Barwon prison in Melbourne, prisoners are allowed 90 minutes of exercise per day.
Well, there you go. Well, there you go. How absolutely ridiculous and outrageous. And, you know, I think anyone who could just look at things with a neutral, you know, like just open mind to just look at things as they are and ask yourself the question, does this feel right? And does this make sense? You know, talking about government health recommendations, so-called recommendations, that are supposed to be, you know, for our health in the time of a so-called viral pandemic. And they're saying, stay away from sunshine, you know, stay away from social interaction and human touch, and breaking up community.
Don't get fresh air.
Fresh air. You know, don't buy your fruit and veggies from the fresh food farmers markets, local markets, and support your local community, because outdoor markets, mind you, they're closed. You can only purchase your processed foods and your glyphosate, you know, chemical-laden foods from the supermarket, Coles and Woolies, because, you know, that's safe, because we care about your health. And, you know, we don't mind if you eat McDonald's and you smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol all day, but just as long as you don't breathe in oxygen, we insist that you breathe recycled carbon dioxide for like pretty much the majority of the day. That's what we need. And we'll pump you with fear and give you no hope. And I mean, it's just opposite. It's opposite from what we should be doing.
I'm not sure if you've got feedback from your friends and family in Melbourne about what it's like to have to wear a mask, because there's no law or even recommendation in Queensland at the moment. But wearing it especially those surgical and N95 masks, the ones that do actually work. The face coverings, because this is why it's called a face covering mandate, because it could be a bandana, or Dan Andrew said even a hanky. That's not going to work. It just shows that it's a law that they've introduced. But if you're actually wearing the surgical one, you significantly overheat on the forehead. You get a dry throat. You basically feel like you have the symptoms of COVID-19, the hot forehead and the dry throat.
Absolutely outrageous. To me, look, to me, it's criminal. It's not justified. It's questionable about whether it's a breach of established human rights legislations that we have in this country. I know that they've come out and said, oh, it's an emergency, so, you know, we can just do whatever we want. You know, it's an emergency, so your human rights legislation doesn't matter, your constitution doesn't matter, your international treaties, don't worry about that, it's an emergency, it's a disaster. You know, that means we can just do whatever we want. You know, it's known. You don't have to speak to a nurse or a surgeon or something and ask them how it feels to wear a mask all day, who may have to do it, you know, in other circumstances, although that's not to protect them from virus. That's just
that's obviously it's sensible in the surgical procedures, and also some a doctor and nurse administrated procedures for them to wear a mask. But the thing is, once they're done treating patients or operating on them, they take the mask off. They're not wearing it all the time.
Yes, well, that's right. And, you know, like, I find very upsetting to see. And, look, it's my view that, look, I don't want to encourage people. People can do what they want. I personally don't think that it's a moral and a valid and a just directive. And I'd question, certainly speaking with the experts, question the legality and lawfulness of such a mandate.
Because here in Melbourne, when the stage 4 lockdown expires on September 13th, as I said in my introduction, Daniel Andrews will get some extension on the state of emergency powers, and he and Dr. Brett Sutton have said mask wearing is going to be with us for a long time after this, which sort of gives an indication that the face covering mandate will continue. And obviously, post-September, that's when we're getting into the summer period. Daniel Andrews has said you won't be required to wear it in all settings. And I can't imagine when, because it does get really hot here in Melbourne, contrary to Melbourne's weather reputation. It can get 30, 35 degrees. If there is a face covering mandate still in some circumstances, like say if you're in a gathering at a barbecue and you have to wear masks when you're not eating, that you are significantly going to overheat during that time.
Indeed. Oh, look, at this point, I think, I encourage people to go inside. I know, look, I don't know if it's because of the education that we have or, just a cultural thing. That there seems to be a tendency, I think, for people to think that, we need to always follow the rules. And if someone tells you to do something, you just have to do it. And if the government says something, then that means it's automatically law. And in those circumstances, is it ever, okay to question that? And I would argue that that's not only naive, but incorrect. I say we have a moral and civic duty to question the morality and to go inside to our own moral compass and ask ourselves if things add up, if things make sense, and if things are right and wrong. And we have a moral and civic duty to stand up and make our voice heard when that's not the case. And, I say that applies to, I've called on police to think about that, of course, when they're told to enforce, rulings, directives, that may or may not be legal or lawful, to question whether they think that's a moral action. Did they sign up to arrest people from their local neighbourhood playground because they were exercising and not wearing the correct mask?
Which has happened here in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And we're just having a discussion here about the face covering mandate. We're not encouraging anyone to break any laws. We're just obviously debating its effectiveness.
Well, look, there's mountains of evidence contrary to the benefits of masking, and obviously, I know the experts or the government-approved experts, you might say that the science supports it unequivocally. But it was only a couple of months ago that even the WHO official documentation argued against the use of it. So they've certainly done a major backflip. It was an interesting one. Just really quickly, I'll tell you a story. When the first masking mandate came down for Melbourne, and Professor Mary McLaws from the University of New South Wales, who incidentally was also talking about why we should quarantine people and remove them, including children, from their homes.
Yes, I remember that, which they're doing in Auckland. Oh,
yes, indeed. And look, it's already written into legislation to have the powers to do such a thing here. There's been cases of it in the US. This is where it's going. And you've got to ask yourself the question whether how does this feel? Does this sit right? How does it feel that they would have the police, for example, would have the power to enter your home without a warrant? I mean, does this sound proportionate? What's really going on? And look, part of the problem is people, I think, do rationalise it and do think that it's okay because they're being told that this is a super virus spreading like wildfire and we're all in existential danger, and that it's going to wipe out the entire planet. But a little bit of research outside of the mainstream indicates that that is not really consistent with the actual data and the actual numbers of, what's happening around the world. Incidentally, even something like mandatory masking, right? Dan and co, Premier Daniel Andrews and co, argue that they can override things like the Human Rights Act in Victoria.
The state of disaster. The government has the ability to suspend some rights under our charter.
Correct. So that's the whole justification. They say that because it's a state of disaster, that they can override those pre-existing legislated rights. Now, here's the thing, though, because that means there has to be a legitimate state of disaster, state of emergency. So if there was, see, part of the reason they're basing that on is they're saying that there's no treatment for COVID-19, right? But we've seen unbelievably effective results all over the world first from hydroxychloroquine,
The drug
and now
that shall not be named, we refer to it.
well, name it. I'll name it. I'm not afraid. I'm not too worried about the video getting censored. Look, I'm tired of this. I'm not going to be bullied into not talking about it. This is a medicine that's been on the WHO's safe essential medicines list for 65 years. That's being used on the front line all over the world with great success, and was made illegal in April by Health Minister Jenny Mikakos, who's a tax lawyer.
And also in Queensland as well. It's also illegal in Queensland.
Yeah, that's right. And look, this is just not on. I mean, how this can be justified for safety reasons, that just does not stack up. It doesn't. I'm sorry. But if you go and do some research and have a look at the amount of studies that have been done over decades, this HCQ is a proven safe drug and showed immense. Now, look, I'm not saying that Big Pharma is the answer, okay? I'm generally against pharmaceutical options, but the fact is, HCQ, apart from the fact it's just a synthetic derivative of quinine, right, which comes from, from bark, from tree bark, okay? So it's not the most toxic of pharmaceuticals, but more to the point, it's cheap, it's safe, it's effective, it's available right now, and it's having great success. And if you've got a treatment, and also ivermectin is showing amazing potential as well, then there is no state of disaster and state of emergency if you've got these treatments available, right? And this is why I would submit potentially is why there's a reluctance and a hesitance to encourage the use, or in fact suppress it, as we're seeing, because it doesn't fit in with the overall plan.
Or it's just another pathetic exercise in Trump derangement syndrome, because he was the one who gave it a lot of publicity. And of course, if Trump suggests something, the media and the elites, intellectuals are automatically against it. I've previously said if Trump had never mentioned it, hydroxychloroquine, I wonder how different the conversations might have been. And they always point to the fact that 2 people in the US died because they drank fish tank cleaner, which apparently had some particles of hydroxychloroquine, as showing that it's dangerous, where drinking fish tank cleaner, that is a complete lunacy.
What an absolute joke. I mean, look, why would you do that if it was available over the counter or by prescription, which it should be, and which it was, and which it is in many countries in the world? So, there's just to think that that's going to happen is just lunacy. But, we saw the same thing with the disinfectant and the bleach saga, where, I'm not going to look, say what you want about Trump, but even anyone with a speck of neutrality and independence can observe that every single day, every article, every day, in almost every mainstream media publication, is just ripping him up and destroying him and spinning everything he says against him. And I just can't see how that is actually biased. Obviously we know that we can't expect that from the mainstream media, but it's just so obvious. Like, I just can't believe that people can't see that. And look, it's clear. But what's interesting though, Tim, is that hydroxychloroquine was actually made illegal in France prior to him making those statements. So it seems to me that what you say is a fair point, and I'm certain that that's part of it. But I think that there was, there's clearly political and financial interests at play here, and the decisions that are being made on a government level, I would submit, are being directed by those interests far more than the true care and desire for protecting the health and safety of the people.
Though we still got told last week by the Prime Minister Scott Morrison that this unapproved and still not completely tested coronavirus vaccine would be as mandatory as possible, which could be rolled out, well, perhaps even by year's end. And the manufacturer, they've already been exempted from liability, and they said, well, even though we're going to manufacture it, we don't know how much dose you'll need or how regularly you'll need it. Yet that's going to be as mandatory as possible, and there's already been discussions about how to make it mandatory as possible without it being mandatory, of course.
Yeah, look, it's just a little bit of wordplay as usual from Morrison, you know, and a bit of gaslighting as well. I liked how he came out and said it's going to be mandatory, and then people got up in arms and he said, "Oh, I didn't say it was going to be mandatory. I said as mandatory as possible." Oh, that's a bit of an overreaction, you know. That's just typical gaslighting. That's the kind of thing that they do, psychological warfare. But look, mandatory vaccination is an interesting one. You know, speaking about being labelled something, if you question the mainstream, you know, like there's not just like pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine, okay? Like it amazes me that I have to make this point, but you know, this doesn't seem to be getting through to a lot of people. Now, just because you question, or maybe you're a little hesitant about the legality of perhaps of enforcing mandatory experimental medical procedures, maybe a little bit hesitant about being forced to take medical procedures in general, that you know, in terms of body sovereignty and how you choose to manage your own health. There's a lot of reasons why, you know, also the fact that it's being rushed through, and questioning whether the correct amount of safety testing, you know, considering that usually takes 10 to 20 years, and even after that sort of time period can still have drastically, you know, unexpected side effects. So, you know, it's completely, I think, natural and normal and reasonable for anyone to have a bit of hesitation about such a drastic move as mandatory vaccination. And, you know, it's clear that even such a slight hesitation, you just get labelled as an anti-vaxxer, and it's just ridiculous. Mandatory, look, we can argue about border closures and masks and stuff like that. To me, mandatory vaccination, I can't even see how it's open for debate. Mandatory vaccination is definitely, I would submit, I believe, and I say those things for a reason, it's unlawful, it's illegal. I mean, you know, mandatory vaccination is a violation of state legislation. You can say that the public emergency overrules it, okay, it's a violation of federal legislation. It's also a violation of the Constitution, section 51, 23A, if on top of my head, about civil conscription, okay? And then it violates several international treaties and Declaration of Human Rights, Nuremberg Code in terms of war crimes. Experimental medical procedures, this is just not on. And a vaccine is an experimental procedure. It just is. Even after 10 years, it's still an experimental procedure. After rushing it through after 6 months or 12 months, that is an experimental medical procedure.
Well, even here in Victoria, with all the encouragement for people to get tested, when we had those 10 postcode hotspots, the Department of Health and Human Services went door to door to ask people to get tested, and they did concede that they couldn't force people to have a coronavirus test. They did concede under their Charter of Human Rights and Responsibility. They couldn't do that, and I've spoken before about this is not it's a very invasive test. Goes right up your nostrils, right down your throat as well. It's the most, one of the most unpleasant medical tests you can have.
Indeed, and you know, I've spoken with you know, with doctors about it. I spoke with a doctor who is a close contact of mine about the testing procedures. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy about PCR testing in general and about how effective and how accurate it is. But speaking about the specific type of test that you mentioned, now sticking a swab up the back of your nose to scrape the cells from the blood-brain barrier is not necessary. Okay, it's not. You know, they're trying to say that we should wear face coverings because they reckon it can be spread in the droplets of your saliva and your mucus or whatever, right? So then, you know, it's a logical extension that you could just do a saliva swab and it would be the same. Now, a doctor of mine who doesn't agree with a lot of my views about this crisis, as you can imagine, but strictly scientifically speaking, said to me that there is not a statistically significant difference in the effectiveness of a saliva swab to scraping the back of your blood-brain barrier, and such an action is potentially dangerous as well as being extremely unpleasant. So it certainly raises the question as to why. And just quickly, just on the topic of things that are mandatory, like the testing potentially and the masking and the vaccinations, and then Morrison saying, oh, it's not mandatory, it'd be mandatory, it's possible. I mean, a lot of people had said this, but I just want to reiterate, when you put such restrictions on people that they can't go anywhere, do anything, participate in society in any way, work potentially, leave the home, use public transport, engage in society in any meaningful way, unless they take the vaccine. Or if they're on a Centrelink payment, for example, and you start to cut the payments and say, well, you'll only get the payments if you take the vaccine. Do you understand, Mr. Morrison, that is the same as making it mandatory? Like, you can use your little wordplay and say mandatory as possible, but it's not technically mandatory, but it is. It's de facto mandatory. It's the same thing. So stop insulting our intelligence and just acting like an absolute buffoon, and just at least have the courage to call it what it is, and stop pretending that it's something that it isn't.
Well, as your Premier, Annastasia Palaszczuk, she was the first to embrace the mandatory as possible when it came to just the flu vaccination, because obviously when the sports leagues restarted, obviously they're national competitions, so they cross state lines, and so she introduced the no jab, no play policy for professional sports athletes, even though the flu vaccine doesn't protect you against COVID-19. And she did this absurd demonstration of how easy it is to get a flu vaccine in front of the cameras. I'm sure you saw that footage as well.
Yes, indeed, I did. And, look, I'm only repeating myself here, but look, no jab, no pay. This kind of coercion to take the flu vaccine. I mean, the flu vaccine doesn't even work, right? Like, I mean, no one can argue that it works. And like, even Bill Gates, right? Like, if you go onto any government website, they'll say, we encourage over 65s especially to get the vaccine, and it's free. Flu vaccine I'm talking about, right? Go and listen to Bill Gates say, oh, look, yeah, we found with the flu vaccine that doesn't really work for older people, but, we want to make sure that with the COVID one that it does. That's important to us, like, it's openly stated. And then there's a number of studies that have shown that anyone who's been exposed to the flu vaccine, the regular flu vaccine, has actually been more susceptible to falling, ill with the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 infection, as they call it. So yeah, it's this sort of pressure, coercion. I just don't. It doesn't sit right with me. I think we need to have open debate, and I think that see. Here's the thing, right? People say if you say something that sounds even remotely anti-vaccine, you're a crazy anti-vax loon, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're anti-science, you're anti-all science, you're probably, whatever else. And this is not the right approach, in my opinion, okay? We need to foster open debate. Now, if you're going to have a chat with someone who you would maybe, and I'm talking if you think this way, you might label as an anti-vaccine person, I'll tell you something. Either you're going to find that person has a child who's been seriously injured by a vaccine, and that's why they started researching vaccines, or they know someone who had that experience, or they've personally been damaged in one way or another and then gone and researched and found that things aren't quite the way that the mainstream media and a lot of the medical profession are presenting that they are. Now, I'm not saying that vaccines are bad, full stop, okay? I'm just saying that claiming that the science is settled and that there's literally almost no risk is just false. The data doesn't support that. There is risk. There is. And the main argument you will hear is that where there's risk, there has to be choice. And coercing and whether it's mandatory or strongly coerced to do so, not just coerced, but then shamed in, you got government and media shaming people for questioning these things. That's just not the way we should do things in our society, I don't believe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now let's move on to, last, it's just...
Sorry, mate, just one moment. Sorry about
that. Yep, that's all good. I want to talk about now what I refer to as Queensland's sudden mini lockdown, because it was last Saturday, the 22nd of August, Annastasia Palaszczuk announced that only 10 people would be allowed to gather in private and in outdoor settings in South-East Queensland. The rest of the state remains at 30. And like, say if you had a birthday party or some sort of mass barbecue planned for that weekend, Annastasia Palaszczuk has just, and this is what I so hate about these daily proclamations from not just our Premier, but they can have a significant impact on your life. That has never been the case in Australia as we know it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, just, bang, just like that. And for what? For why? Like, there's just a nominal amount of cases, I was looking at the stats today. I mean, not that, look, I don't want to really encourage looking at tests and analysing case numbers and stuff, because these numbers are misleading anyway, okay? Because, like, they're confusing. They're using the word case in a very deceptive, misleading way, because a positive test, and a case, if someone is asymptomatic compared to someone who ends up in hospital, these are not the same thing. We have to really talk apples and apples, okay? But like, as you say, to make such a drastic move that has such a large, wide-reaching effect on people's mental health and well-being and disruptive to people's lives, and was that proportionate to the situation that we're in? It's all very strange.
I know that a lot of Victorians have been lamenting that we can't cast judgment on Dan Andrews' handling of the pandemic until November 2022, when the state election is, though Queenslanders can cast judgment on Annastasia Palaszczuk on October 31st, and New Zealanders can cast judgment on Jacinta Ardern on October 17th. But it seems, because they are so close to the election, their reactions are being even more disproportionate. I mean, during the second wave here in Victoria, it wasn't as soon as we got 10, 20, 30 cases, we went straight back into lockdown. It was when they started to get into the hundreds, when the full, at least the Melbourne Metro lockdown, was announced. It seems that because there's an election coming up, that's making them behave even worse.
Yeah, fair call. I mean, look, obviously, what can you expect from politicians other than to politicise it and, one way or another to look for some way to, find advantage in it. I don't 100% agree with you in the sense that I don't subscribe to the view that you can only cast judgment or have an opinion or take any action or do anything about a standing government until election day.
Oh, well, I should say that's when you can cast the ultimate judgment.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, look, no, I understand your point. Just the point that I'm making. Of course, yes, we can go to the polls and they can make your voice heard. I think what I've been talking about in some of my videos lately is just encouraging people to take a more active role at getting involved in politics at the grassroots. And look, maybe not everyone's interested in politics. I can understand that. I didn't used to find it particularly interesting in the past, but I think at this time, it's really important for all of us to just take, we've got time as well, because a lot of us are not working, stuff like that. We've got to take a bit of interest and empower ourselves. Now, there's a lot of argument as to, what the most effective way to make change in our society is at the moment. There's a lot of argument about whether our system is running as it actually should, if it's actually following the system that we think, that we're taught, that that's how things work, and maybe that's not really how things work at the moment. That's maybe something we'll talk about a bit more when we talk about the status correction course. But just from the perspective of working within the system for the purpose of this particular conversation that we're having at the moment, I think that it's really important, as well as other things that we'll talk about later, to take an interest, go and research. Doesn't take very long. Jump on the internet and find out all the candidates in your area and get out of the mindset that we've got to vote Liberal or Labor, okay? Because I would put it to you that Liberal, Labor and the Greens all have significant issues and may not necessarily be taking us where we want to go. And it's worthwhile at this time seeing what other options are available and who else is on the scene. Okay, so if you're, for example, if you're against mandatory vaccination, you might like to just check out what Liberal, Labor and the Greens have to say about mandatory vaccination, because I think you'll find that all three of those parties support that. And so if that's something that you're very strongly against, you might want to consider not voting for any of them. And the nature of these three parties is that they do not vote for what the electorate tells them on every issue, nor do they vote with their conscience. They vote what the party tells them to vote. And there's a big problem, very serious problem, with the political party system that we have in this country.
Well, that's one of your video series on your Truth and Freedom Report YouTube channel. You're lucky in Queensland, even though you do only have one House of Parliament, the Legislative Assembly. You don't have an upper house that has that checks and balances, but there are lots of other options come state election. There's obviously Pauline Hanson's One Nation. There's the Katter Australian Party, but that's more of a North Queensland party. There is the new dedicated North Queensland Party as well. There's a lot of good independents in Queensland as well, and I think definitely coming up to your state election, a lot of Queenslanders they're thinking the same as you outside of the Liberal Labor Greens paradigm.
Yeah, indeed. I certainly hope so. That's certainly the mindset I'm encouraging. And look, I know there's some sort of sense of security or tradition or that's the way it's always
competence.
Been. There's no. Yeah, that's right. But look, do they deserve that kind of confidence? Either does it really seem to matter to you that much whether you have a Liberal or Labor government these days? To me, they seem to push more or less. Obviously, they've got some slight differences, but I feel that they're both taking us in the same overall general direction. And it might just be time to send a message. If you're not happy with the way, look, if you like the way that Dan Andrews handling the situation, well, good luck to you. Go and vote for him. I don't know. If you think that Jeff Kennett is going to come in or whoever is going to do something different for you for the Liberal Party, well, then great. But I would say that it might be time to consider other options and take, even if maybe you're someone who's, I've always voted Liberal, I've always voted Labor, I don't know. Maybe your family's always voted Labor for 4 generations. I don't know. Maybe Labor Party doesn't stand for what it did 4 generations ago. It might be time to just investigate, do a bit of research, find out who these people are, go and contact them personally. Go contact your local members and the candidates for your local area and have a chat. I think you'll find that they'll all be open to having a chat. And if not, well, they should be. And that tells you something if they're not, because they're supposed to be your voice in the parliament speaking for you. Just one quick note I want to make, just mentioning about how Queensland only having one house. Interesting, quirk about that is that actually there was a referendum to ask the people if they wanted to do that, and they said no, and yet it happened anyway. So it's a funny thing about how things happen to to go in this country. It's a very strange situation. But yes, you are quite right in saying we only have one house.
Well, if you look, because we have the National Cabinet, which makes the COVID safe or COVID management decisions, even though obviously it's up to the states in some areas and up to the Commonwealth in some respect. Obviously, in Victoria, you've seen both our health department and contact tracing team really stuff up, but also the aged care facilities that are run by the Commonwealth. That's where most of the deaths have come from in this second wave, aged care outbreaks, which has just been absolutely devastating. But we have an even split amongst the National Cabinet, Liberal, Labor. And the South Australian government is a Liberal government, and they're now enacting a hard border closure, which is causing significant angst and anger in the border communities of the Victorian South Australian border there, because we've talked a lot about Tweed Heads and Coolangatta. There are those, since we are all Australians, those border communities on the Victoria-South Australia border, obviously the Twin Cities on the Victoria-New South Wales border as well, between Albury and Wodonga. I had a couple of weeks back on my show Jared Seavey, who was arrested for going to do his job from Wodonga to Albury, but was arrested because he didn't have a permit. And obviously Annastasia Palaszczuk, she's driven by politics, but the the heartbreak and the anxiety, we're starting to get these horrific stories about the consequences of looking tough on borders for political reasons. For example, that grandmother who had emergency brain surgery in Sydney, and she wasn't allowed to quarantine at her rural Queensland property. She had to go into hotel quarantine, but then we also heard it was broken by a current affair and the 9 newspapers, the Age, Sydney Morning Herald, that, and this was particularly outrageous here, I'll just bring it up on the screen, that a Melbourne millionaire and his family were granted a quarantine exemption sailing their yacht from Melbourne, Port of Melbourne, to the Gold Coast. The man's name is Mark Simmons, who runs Simmons Homes. That has now been revoked after rightful outrage there. And also Kylie Minogue was granted, well, she wasn't granted a quarantine exemption, but she was granted a exemption from hotel quarantine to quarantine at home, but not this grandmother. And we've also heard about the parents who weren't allowed to see the newborn baby because they were in a Queensland hospital. They were New South Wales residents, and all Annastasia Palisade said Queensland hospitals are for Queensland residents. The heartlessness of these leaders, and also the heartlessness that the bureaucrats apply these regulations with no discretion, no compassionate consideration. That's when I really get teary and upset hearing about these stories, because these are real people.
Yeah, look, that's it's really well said, and it's just an outrageous situation. I mean, as you say, that's just heartless, absolutely heartless. No compassion, and it's just unwarranted, really. I mean, really, like, I'm just speechless when I hear stories like that. I don't know what to make of that sort of stuff. How do you,
do you really think that a Queensland grandmother who's just recovering from brain surgery, needs painkillers and that, do you really think she's going to escape her home to, I don't know, go out and potentially infect people?
Obviously it's just ridiculous, and also what you mentioned first about different rules for different members of society. That's just not what Australia's all about. And I think all this sort of stuff, this is just not what Australia's about. I'm sorry, but I'm not here to speak for all Australians. Everyone can have their own voice, but I have a sense of what it means to be an Australian. I have a sense of what cultural values and morals and things that we stand for in this country. I've lived here all my life. My family's been here for 150, 160 years on both sides of my family. I'm a just real passionate, patriotic Australian, and I don't mean to speak for anyone else, but I think that these things don't sit right with me, and they are not the values that I expect in this country, and I can't accept that kind of heartlessness and lack of compassion and inhumane action, and just illogical as well, mind you, of our elected leaders. No, I won't stand for it. It's not acceptable.
Someone's alerted me into the comments that it was actually Danny Minogue who was granted that exemption to quarantine at home, and she has subsequently been a judge on that Masked Singer reality show in Melbourne, which has had a coronavirus outbreak, which, despite us being in stage 4 lockdown, apparently trash reality TV is an essential business.
Oh, absolutely ridiculous. But look, there was 5G towers going up when under hard lockdown stage 4. So, I don't want to get into the, a debate about 5G, whether it's safe or not. That's a different issue. My question is whether that's an essential service. If there's a deadly virus and we're sending our fellow countrymen and women out to put up 5G towers, do we need the fast internet that urgently when there was such serious risk and danger? That Yeah.
Well, if everyone's working at home, I guess we do need, and everyone's on Zoom, you probably do need firmer, more reliable internet.
Oh, look, I suppose, but like, that doesn't really sit with me that well, in terms of, it just doesn't seem right if the risk was really that serious. But anyway, okay, I'll take your point. I'll leave it there. That's fine.
Now, after the mini lockdown was announced, you covered the People's Revolution picnic, which was on the Sunday in Brisbane Botanical Gardens. Obviously, more than 10 people there, but it seemed to, as was promoted in the Facebook event, which you shared on your Facebook profiles, promoted as peaceful. And the only thing that was going to make it not peaceful is what Queensland police decided to do. And I saw your live footage. It looked a wonderful community event.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's just a wonderful day. Terrific atmosphere. It was just really great. Obviously, we've all been through a lot. It's been a stressful and a difficult time for us all, regardless of, what your thoughts about, some of the more controversial issues, I think we can all agree it's taken a toll on us, perhaps for different reasons, depending on which direction you're coming from. But it was just an amazing community atmosphere. We got together, people came from all over, Queensland really, and especially from the Gold Coast and Brisbane, obviously, to congregate there. And it was amazing just to connect with a couple of Facebook friends, for example, that I've never met in person before. So that was really nice. People that I've got to know really well online to connect in person. And look, there's just something special about communicating and interacting and getting together on a personal level as a group. It's we're human. This is what we do. We're social creatures. So from that point of view, it was terrific. Obviously, you're quite right. It was peaceful. I mean, why would it be anything else? We're not there to cause trouble.
Queensland police there? Were they monitoring it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a police presence there. I'll just quickly mention, there was the Wake Up Australia protest, which happened on the 30th of May in Brisbane, which had actually even more people than what we had on the weekend. And the Queensland police were there too. And we were under similar restrictions at that point as well. And they allowed it to go forward at that point too. They made passage for us to walk through the city. There was a handful of them there at the picnic on the weekend. I probably saw maybe 6 or 7 or 8 of them, I suppose. I did eavesdrop at one time as they were having a chat to one of the organisers of the event. In the early stages, they were absolutely fine with us being there. They were just sort of chatting about the logistics of it. The message really was basically, as long as you don't sit on top of each other, we're pretty okay with this to go ahead. It had a bit of a chat about what they go through the city. A bit later on, there was a little bit more tension between the organisers and the police as the intention was made that they wanted to walk through the city, and the police were maybe suggesting that they didn't want them to do that, but they did do it in the end. And as far as I know, there wasn't any police interference at all. And look, it's really, really important because, this is exactly how it should be for a number of reasons. Number one, freedom of assembly, right to gather peacefully, right to express political views, and freedom to, not that it was technically a protest, but I'll just mention that, in Melbourne, making the right to protest against government.
Assembly. Correct,
that's right. So peaceful assembly. We're protected. This is a protected right in this country. We have a right to do that. Now, I know that the directive says no more than 10 in the group. We all sort of sat in separate groups. Look, they used their discernment, they used their moral judgment, and I believe they made the right decision, and I applaud them for that. And I respect the Queensland Police for doing that. And as I said on the day, the police up here are not the same as what you've got down in Victoria.
No, definitely not.
No, it's really distressing, actually, to watch the actions of the Victoria Police, and I've been fairly critical of them in my some of my articles. And look, at the end of the day, there's good people in every group. Okay, I'm not anti-police. I'm certainly not saying defund the police or anything ludicrous like that. I'm questioning who they've sworn their allegiance to, and the nature of them being a for-profit business, and how that affects them as a public service.
Are you talking about when it comes to their quotas, when it comes to issuing infringements? Yeah,
indeed. I mean, this is public knowledge. It's not like conspiracy. I mean, it's fact. We know So, or, you know, they might call it quota, they might call it benchmarks, for instance, but it's just more wordplay and stuff. So that's clear. Just looking at the way, though, it's their attitude, I think, towards people that upsets me. Speaking about, you mentioned before about, you know, the only possibility of there being violence or trouble would be the police. And I don't know if you were referring to it directly, but what comes straight to my mind is the actions of Victoria Police in Melbourne when those protests happened. Because, you know, despite the mainstream media's best efforts to say otherwise, you could see very clearly on hundreds of independent social media videos that it was the police that instigated the violence on a number of
this is the Mother's Day anti-lockdown protest, because even though National Cabinet on the Friday announced the framework for a COVID-safe Australia, Dan Andrews said, nothing changes today. Victoria Police will be out enforcing the lockdown on Mother's Day because the state of emergency doesn't expire until Monday. So just a reminder there that Dan cancelled Mother's Day.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, like, look, I understand, of course, the police have a job to do. And, you know, I've written a number of times on my site, I call to police in this situation, and the military, mind you. You know, we're in a serious situation here, and I understand that the nature of these type of jobs includes an element of following orders and following an order of hierarchy, and you know, not questioning those sort of things to a degree. But that's just, you have to question. You have to go inside and do the smell test or whatever you want to think about it and ask yourself, does this feel right? Does this smell right? Is this what I signed up for? Is this morally right? Because just following orders, if you're going to enforce rules that are, you know, immoral, illegal, unlawful, you know, just following orders is not necessarily, or I would put to you, I would argue it's not a defense and it won't save you. And there was an interesting video on the Know Your Rights group by, I forget the name off the top of my head, it was Mike Palmer, I think he does that. Actually saying that basically sending out a warning to police, not in an intimidating way, just in an awareness way, to know that, you know, some of your viewers may and may not know, but obviously, you know, police are running they're not technically public government organisations. They are, you know, something different. And in a case where there was charges, you know, laid against a police officer. There was a case recently where the police, where the government said, I forget which state, if it was Queensland or Victoria, I'm sorry, I can't think off the top of my head, where the police service said that we do not accept liability because, or the government said we don't accept liability because it's not actually technically a government body, it's a private organisation. And so that person, the police officer, can be sued directly, personally. So be aware, police officers of Australia, apart from the fact of calling to your heart, think about what's right and what's wrong and what you want to do and how you want to treat your fellow countrymen and women. Just do some research into the possible repercussions that could actually come about if you were to enforce unlawful directives on your fellow countrymen and women, and whether you may or may not find that you're personally liable for damages.
I'll have to look into a bit more of that legal aspect myself, but that's interesting to hear. Now, obviously, you've heard about the September 5 Freedom Day demonstration proposal nationwide. I'm not sure if there's been any plans in the work today. It can take place in most other states and territories, but obviously will be still be under stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne and the level 3 lockdown in regional Victoria. And we saw how Victoria Police dealt with the previous Freedom Day, a planned protest a couple of weeks back. I just want to play for the audience what Dan Andrews said at his daily press conference about the September 5 Freedom Day proposal.
Sure. Protest planned for September 5, your reaction to people attending that, and I'll give you the second question at the same time. The 7-day forecast is out. It's going to be lovely on Saturday. Will we see ADF around at beaches and things, patrolling areas that they...
I think you'll see enforcement activity across the board. Those rules remain in place, and they're not there for fun, and they're not there for any other reason than to keep driving these numbers down to the lowest possible level. As I've said many times, if we don't properly defeat this in its second wave. We open up, everyone feels great for a couple of weeks, and then we're into a third wave. That's not where we want to find ourselves. We want to try and do everything we possibly can to see this thing off as it presents in the second wave, and then begin cautiously, steadily opening up. That's all about economic activity. It's about safety as well. We've got to do that properly. Now is not the time to protest. The only protest that any of us should be engaged in is against this virus. And it's fundamentally wrong, irresponsible and unsafe for people to be protesting. And I would urge them and those close to them not to do that. That just doesn't make any sense. That could fritter away so much of the good work that we've done.
It's interesting he didn't use such strong words when the Black Lives Matter protests took place in Melbourne in early June. They basically said at the time, Dan Andrews and his police minister, Lisa Neville, that, it's impossible to enforce it when there's so many people.
Yeah, the sound wasn't very good.
No, you can't hear it on. You can't hear it on your end. I was just playing it for its audience. But basically, he was saying that Victoria Police will continue with enforcement as per usual.
Yeah, look, of course he's going to say that, and look, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I don't. It's tricky on this platform as to how I go about approaching this and what I'm seen to say and do. I think that the way that I would approach this situation is this: COVID directives are not legislation necessarily.
They're regulations.
Right, and legislation itself is not law necessarily. Now, I highly recommend that people take an interest in starting to do a little bit of research about understanding their rights and different approaches to what the word law really means. I understand and appreciate the view that might say that we shouldn't break the law, or be seen to incite others to do that. The question is, what is law and what isn't? And in terms of sometimes, there's different types of law, and there's an order as well. There's a natural hierarchy. There's a natural order to laws. There's what I would, there's divine law or natural law.
We're getting into now your video series now on your YouTube channel. Which it's a 5-part series on status correction course. So I might get you now to elaborate on briefly about what you're trying to communicate with that.
Indeed. So look, obviously, just out of personal interest, I started to investigate. I think when you start going down looking for truth, and looking for, deeper meaning and understanding and appreciation, perception of reality, just trying to decipher, see through and see what system we're really living in. I use terminology like calibrating to the real world. And so just really briefly, if you're getting your information from the mainstream media, you're calibrating to a reality, which I would argue is pretty far from what's actually true and real. And that's a big problem when it comes to discerning, in general, in your life, what's true and what's false. Add to that we got 13 years of indoctrination, most of us at school, and a lot of us went to uni and got a bit more. And look, I'm not saying that every single speck of it was wrong, but I would argue that there's a lot of information that may not have been right, and some of it intentionally so. So, in terms of snapping out of that conditioning, and I would go as far to say brainwashing, and calibrating to the real world, being able to see through a little bit clearer to the true picture of reality. What I'm getting at is that at some point I believe on this path, which a lot of people I would say are probably on, something like that. You might eventually come to starting to study law and what is law, because it's actually all connected. Like your law and your money and your history and religion and all these sort of things, I would argue, trace back to common roots, and you start to see how all these things are connected. So when you start awakening to ideas and concepts such as sovereignty, empowerment, and what it means to step into your power and to be a sovereign being, an empowered being who is master of their own destination, and who stands firm in their, courageous in their truth. The legal aspect to me is relevant. So I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit long-winded, but I'm just trying to paint a little bit of a picture here. So now, if you recognise in life that there's a bit of a spiritual battle going on at the moment, maybe a bit of an energetic war. I would argue there's a little bit of a war between, you could say good and evil, you could say true and false, light and darkness. To me, underneath everything that we're seeing in reality in this world at this time, there's an underlying battle between these things. And if you are drawn to finding the light and chasing after truth, real truth, the real truth about what's going on, you start to have a look into the legal system and comparing that to law. Okay, so the status correction course ultimately is just the product of my research into the legal system, how it came about, what its origins are, and how do we establish that sort of sovereignty. So if we want to fight against the evil, we have to first acknowledge that the evil exists. So in my little step plan, I've got this little 3-step plan. You can follow or not, it doesn't matter, whatever, it's just an idea. Number one is to acknowledge the evil. If you want to see the true reality and you want to know the light, the real goodliness and godliness that exists, we learn from opposites. So it's a necessary stage to acknowledge the extent of the evil that exists in this world. And depending on the experiences you've had in life, you may or may not, you'd be aware to various extents of the extent of evil and corruption that does exist in this world. And although it's hard and it's difficult to view, and we'll talk about the evil a bit more when we get onto child sex trafficking and that sort of thing, I believe it's necessary in the awakening process to be brave enough to face it head on and accept it and acknowledge it, not accept it necessarily, but acknowledge that it exists. And then you need to act, okay? It's not about dwelling on sadness or fear or, how terrible it is. We need to acknowledge how terrible it is. We'll get activated, whether it's a bit of fear or a bit of anger, or a bit of stress, whatever it might be of seeing this evil. And then we need to get activated, take action and do something about it. Step 2 in that little scenario, I say, is revoking consent. What we start to see is that the power structures that exist in our world largely can only exist with our consent. And we give that consent in different ways. So in a legal sense, something as simple as silence is consent is actually a powerful maxim. So if another party makes a claim against you, whether you're even actually conscious of that claim or not, if you don't rebut that claim and you're silent about it, then the legal system it's implied that you consent to it because you haven't rebutted against it. So it's important to energetically revoke consent, and that can be as simple as saying, getting a pen and a piece of paper and saying, I don't consent, and writing down all the things that you've observed in life, in the world, that's happening that you just don't agree with and you don't consent to, and you don't give your power to. So you can just do that in 5 minutes and it's done. I would argue that there are some steps to take to legally revoke consent to the system that enslaves us in a legal sense that we may not be aware is happening. So look, as I went through explaining in that 5-episode series about the difference between the public and the private, the difference between basically when I say status, is there a difference legally between a man or a woman and a person, for example? The hierarchy of laws and concepts of authority, sovereignty, and things like that. So the 5 episodes are about understanding the system that we're a part of, understanding the concept of legalese and the way that the legal industry and police and things like that are seen to use a slightly different form of language called legalese, which is a little bit different from English, using legal dictionary definitions for certain terms, showing the roots of our system back to the Vatican. And starting to explore the history of our country in terms of the line of authority of the Crown, and obviously the interactions that the British Crown has had over the years with the Vatican, and and the influence that they arguably still have over our system, which we may not be aware of. So that, of course, is a lot of background about that. Now, at the end of the 5, now you might have heard Tom Barnett, some other people talking about these sort of concepts in the Know Your Rights group about, being a man or a woman of the realm as a living flesh and blood human being, as opposed from a person, which is a dead legal fictional entity with a name, all in capital letters, which represents that entity rather than you. And look, and let me know how much they do want to go into. I don't need to go into a lot. So if you've been trained in a formal legal education, you're not going to necessarily agree with these things. But the funny quirk about life is that, sometimes things aren't what they appear. And just because that's the way that the curriculum goes, it might be that that's for a specific reason. It's open to debate. When you get to the end of the 5 episodes, I actually say, so now I'm going to look at the solutions of how we extract ourselves from this system, which I would argue, in conjunction with debt slavery through central banks around the world, through the birth certificate and the legal name fraud and all that sort of thing, are allowing this system to persist. And I said that I'd start looking at solutions. And at this point, it gets tricky because there's a large number of people in Australia, just to look at Australia as as an example, obviously that's where we're young. There's a large number of people here who are aware that there's significant problems here. And there's a lot of those people who are aware that there's something not quite right when it comes to our legal system, and that the corruption seems to be pretty significant, and that things aren't operating the way that it should be. A lot of people can agree on that. However, there's a lot of disagreement within these groups as to what we actually need to do, what specifically is the problem, and how we actually go about rectifying or remedying that problem. Some would argue that there is remedy within the system by understanding it or understanding it on a deeper level. Some would argue that the entire system is actually intentionally been set up to enslave us and to use against us, and in which case we need to completely overthrow the system, whether it's through Magna Carta and lawful rebellion, whether it's through establishing a Kingdom of Australia as an entirely different sovereign realm, whether it's about reassessing our status and saying that maybe we are the Crown and that we can use the Privacy Act and other types of legislation to assert ourselves as the sovereign people of this nation and not be under the dominion or the domination of tyrannical government. So, look, I don't know. I'm a little bit long-winded. I go around in circles. I know, and you're welcome to interrupt if I'm not sticking to the topic. But that's in a nutshell what it's all about. So it's really about empowering ourselves with knowledge in all different aspects. And one thing that I say in the course is that, it is about the law and legality and things like that, but there's a deeper sort of element to it, in the sense of that it's time that we need to shatter the illusion. We need to lift the veil, right? There's a lot of illusion and falsity that we've been pumped with over the years. And a lot of people are waking up and realizing that things aren't what they seem. And a lot of this course is about, trying to unravel and shatter those illusions and start getting a truer picture of the system and the reality that we live in.
Well, I won't make any follow-up comments or questions. I'll just encourage my audience to go to your channel and watch the 5-part series themselves, because they are long explanatory videos, roughly half an hour in length. You've summarized it there as concise as possible. So it's definitely worth, even if you don't agree, certainly worth something thinking about. Now, we are getting towards the end of the stream. Obviously, with the pandemic still being on, and hence the lockdown approach still being followed by all our governments, and this suppression or elimination strategy, they're basically the same. That's consuming much of my coverage here at WilmsFront and the website that I run there, The Unshackled, and also your channel as well, Truth and Freedom Project. But you do have other issues that you focus on as well. One of them is, well, we only... the lid was only lifted on it in the middle of last year with Jeffrey Epstein's arrest and suicide. These elite child trafficking rings, and we've certainly only scratched the surface, and it's still in the wider community a scourge.
Oh, indeed. Oh, look, absolutely. And it's actually, of course we talk about COVID a lot, and I know it's Truth and Freedom Report, I do mention, I do obviously talk about COVID because this is the situation that we're in, but you'll notice that I definitely don't only talk about that, and I talk about child sex trafficking, and I talk about institutional child sex abuse, and the terrible troubles that we've got with it's commonly referred to as pedophilia, but I don't like to speak about it in those terms, because pedophilia literally translates to child loving, and there's nothing about love in this situation at all. Okay, there's a distinct push to normalize this kind of behavior and say that it's some sort of sexual orientation. It's not, okay? Strictly not, okay? Because you can't have a consensual, relations with a child of that age, and obviously, I'm seeing a push around the world to lower that age of consent, but what we're talking about is much younger than that. Now, it's nothing to do with child loving. It's child rape, it's torture, it's horrible, horrible ritualistic abuse. The babies, we're talking about babies, okay? It's not even just like, young people. We're going as little as young as babies and toddlers.
Some of
trafficked.
the stories are horrific.
Absolutely, unthinkable evil. It has to be seen to be believed. It has to be seen to be believed. Now, I've been looking at this stuff for a while, and you think you get to a point where you've reached, the level of how evil this stuff can be, and then you go to a new level, and it just drops down to another layer, and it's still shocking. And it's one thing to read about it. So some of you, if you're new to it, might even think it's some kind of conspiracy theory. I have heard eyewitness and victim testimonies. This stuff is real. This is happening. And it's not something far away in a far off land. This is happening in Australia. Okay, we've got a big problem in this country. We are known around the world. This is not new, by the way. This has been going on for a long, long, long time. And, it's all related as well with my status correction course, because the people who have set up this system and who are running the show now are the same, descendants of the people who were doing it 800 years ago and thousands of years ago before that, okay? This is a long, long system. This is not new. It didn't start with COVID, okay? Now, child sex trafficking and institutional pedophilia and the cover-up of such actions is a scourge. A scourge doesn't even cover it. This is the most important issue right now, much more important than some pandemic, which is, may not even be. It doesn't even seem to be. But, I posted a video yesterday of Senator Bill Heffernan from back in 2015 when he released the results of the Royal Commission.
That video has been going viral all over Facebook. Who made it? Because I've seen a lot of people independently post it.
Look, I don't know the origin of this particular video. A contact of mine who's involved with the Save the Children movement in Australia, or Freedom for the Children, I think he refers to it, is the source where I received from it. It may, in fact, have been him that created it. I don't know for sure. But look, Save the Children, Save Our Children, these kind of tags are just absolutely, hammering at the moment. This is not a made-up thing. Go on, if I'm not familiar with it, can you please go and have a look at these tags? Because this is absolutely just so much more important than anything else right now. This cannot go on. It can't go on worldwide. There's millions of children being trafficked worldwide and being subjected to some of the most, you just can't imagine how terrible some of this stuff is. I don't know. It beggars belief. But, it's happening in Australia. Now, that video, if you haven't seen it, of Senator Bill Heffernan saying that the Royal Commission found that there was police reports with victims alleging that they'd been raped and tortured by 28 high-profile Australians. I'm talking former prime ministers, former High Court judge.
This is the people on this list. It's alleged. That we have to emphasise.
Yes, according to the testimony of the victims, it's alleged that these men and women were involved. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm saying that victims have alleged the Commission found that the official ruling was that it wasn't in the public interest, and I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing, and if I don't get it 100% right, okay. But as I understand it, the official ruling was that it wasn't in the public interest to have the identities of these people revealed because it might undermine people's confidence in institutions in this country. And as a result, it was ordered that a 99-year suppression order be placed on this information, and the investigations were dropped. And every government since has allowed that to continue. Now, every member of parliament in our federal parliament right now is aware of the situation, and not one is speaking out about it. This is unacceptable. This behaviour is not acceptable in this country, and I won't stand for it. And I'm going to be very vocal, as I have been for a long time, about this issue and sharing information. Now, I recommend that if you go and have a look at the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, there's a number of video testimonies from victims that you can learn a lot about this issue. Okay, but it is clear, well, there are several victims giving lengthy, detailed accounts of some of the most unthinkable abuse, and it's high-profile people in this country. And look, you know, I'm not judge, jury, and executioner. That needs to be heard before a court. My question is, why hasn't it yet? Because that was 5 years ago that Senator Heffernan said that in to the Parliament, and nothing has come of it. So we see all this, smoke and mirrors from Morrison saying he's going to be cracked down and tough on pedophiles, and then we see a story like we saw today that's really happening. Okay, now first of all, I just want to report this. So you just give me a quick minute here. I've got just a couple of really quick stories to show you what's really happening in this country regarding this issue. Okay, so I've got Philip Thompson, OAM, MP, fighting for Townsville. Now, this is a quote from his Facebook on the 19th of August. Townsville has a shocking number of child sex offenders living amongst us. Last year, I supported the intention to establish a national public register of sex offenders containing information about convicted child sex offenders with details of their names, aliases, offences, physical description and postcode location. Last week, the Queensland Labor government has blocked the establishment of the register. It's not good enough, he says. It was related to an article where it was reported that there was more than 180 child sex offenders at large in the city of Townsville. Now, the government sees fit to track and trace perfectly law-abiding, healthy Australians with the click of a finger, but they can't see fit to trace known child sex offenders. How does this add up with priorities in this country? That doesn't make any sense to me.
And it was revealed here in Victoria today by the Herald Sun that there was actually a new law which victims of sexual assault are not allowed to speak out against their convicted attackers with their real name. Otherwise, they risk a fine or jail. And who was the genius who thought that that was a just and fair law to pass?
Absolutely outrageous and absurd, disgusting behaviour, unjustifiable. No, I'm sorry. Now, look, this is just not on. Okay, you've got adults who experienced child sexual abuse. Go and read the article on news.com.au. I don't promote it with mainstream media, but they got this one right. I'll give credit where it's due. The experience this woman had being raped by her father as a young child, and then he also raped her sister. And, the trauma and the ongoing story, go and read the story. It's just disgusting and terrible. Now, she is not allowed as an adult to use her real name in speaking about this,
Hey, it's illegal to talk about your own life.
Unbelievable. Unless, now, this is the part I can't get myself, unless she pays $10,000, then they'll allow her to do that. Now, the only justification I've heard from a legal contact said that the reasoning behind this was to protect the identities of other children that may be exposed if that person was to use their real name. That doesn't make any sense to me anyway. But how can you say that and then say, oh, but if you pay $10,000, then you're allowed to do it? Now, to me, it's a very interesting connection in the fact that it's use of one's name. for anyone in the audience who has looked into the Justinian deception, or whatever you want to call it, legal name fraud, and the all capitals name, if you've delved into the crowning side of things, and obviously in terms of copyrights and things like that, and who owns that name, and if that name is property. Now, if you know that you're committing legal name fraud by using that name because it's not your property, then it kind of confirms or makes a lot of sense when you think that the government or whoever thinks that they have the right to charge you $10,000 for the use of your own name. Makes you realise that perhaps you don't really own your name, and then suddenly a few things fit into place and start connecting a few dots. But that's obviously back related to the status correction and the other law side of things. But look, getting back to the topic at hand, this is absolutely disgusting. How do we? Who cares about protecting the identity of pedophiles? I don't care about them at all. I don't care about the rights of pedophiles. I care about the rights of children. Okay? And any of these type of laws, this article even suggests that people can be put in jail for breaching this. And even penalties in the many thousands of fines for media for reporting names. So we're not allowed to talk about the victim's name, let alone protecting the identity of pedophiles, of the child rapists, I should say, not pedophiles. So we're not only protecting the identity of child rapists, we're not using tracking and tracing technologies to track and keep a tab on them while they run amok in our communities, putting our children at risk. And we're not even allowing victims of these criminals, of these disgusting vermin that we're infested with in this country. They're not even allowed to use their own name when telling the story about how they were abused and raped and tortured, whatever the case may be, by these vile people. Oh, this is just what's become of our country. Oh, it's just terrible stuff.
Well, as you said, that is such an important, it's not just injustice, but also a blight on our country that needs to be corrected. And when I say corrected, it's not a small thing. It's a significant campaign and also a lot of independent media work as well. But when I was introducing this topic, we're in an uphill battle to just get the freedoms back that we enjoyed last year. So these are the most challenging times that we've ever faced in our lifetimes. I'd like to thank you again, Matt, for coming on the show, and with those rallies in South-East Queensland, showing solidarity with your fellow Australians, us Melburnians and Victorians, and also our trans-Tasman cousins as well in Auckland as well, because Australia and New Zealand, even though we're separate nations, we do share a culture and a British heritage, and also the fact that you used to be able to go to New Zealand without a visa. You just needed a passport. We used to be very close, but with us two nations have been ripped apart as well.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, look, Australia and New Zealand, we're more or less the same. And if you have a look at some of the trans-Tasman, mutual recognition acts, you'll see how very, very intertwined we are in the United Kingdom.
ANZAC, the word ANZAC stands for Australia and New Zealand Army Corps.
Absolutely right. And look, calling on the Anzac spirit and honouring the Anzac spirit is very, very crucial at this time. We need to honour our Anzacs, okay? These brave men who fought for our freedoms, the very freedoms that we've enjoyed, look, I observe that there's just a bit of a denial of what's happening here. I know that, people don't want to accept that, there could be a war, there could be a coup, there could be some sort of internal takeover, is China infiltrating, whatever the case may be. We are under attack right now. I'm telling you, Tim, we are under attack at the moment. And the Anzacs, now, things have changed. It's 2020, okay? It's not World War II. It's modern warfare, it's psychological warfare, it's manipulation, it's all sorts of
information warfare.
That's right. It's a fight on for people's minds and hearts, okay? And we need to rally and remember the sacrifices and the courage that the Anzacs showed to protect our freedom and not be complacent and allow all those sacrifices they made to be just given up without a fight. That's just, I won't stand for it. You know, I'm fighting with every inch of, an ounce of strength and courage I've got, because I value what we have here. You know, we've been blessed, we've been lucky, we've had decades and decades, generations of peace. Obviously, that's right. You know, we really have been the lucky country. Obviously, the government, some would argue, have been dismantling what we've built, for a long time. But nonetheless, we've largely enjoyed peace and prosperity for a long time. And the only, the downside of that, or the danger of that, is that it's bred, I believe, a lot of complacency, and a sense that, bad things can't happen here, or corruption couldn't happen here, or, it'll be like this forever, and we just take it for granted. And we can't afford to do that. We can't. These things are under attack, okay? We have to be vigilant and just pay attention, just be aware, question, okay? Ask questions, do a bit of investigation, do a bit of research, especially if you're in Melbourne and you're locked down, and you're questioning.
Well, it's past curfew now.
Yeah, well, that's right. You can't go out, so get on your computer and do some research, do some independent research. If you haven't done much, I imagine people watching your show are pretty open-minded, things like that. But look, just it's just a general comment. I just wish that people would just do a bit of research, and it's a very important time. I sense and feel this is a very, very important time for our nation, for our country, I should say, and for New Zealand as well. And we really need to rally and stand together, and find strength and solidarity and support in numbers. You spoke about the protest, or the march, Freedom March, coming up on the 5th of September in Melbourne. Talking about 500,000. If 50 people or 500 people go, it will be easy for the police to shut it down. We saw the other day with Sol, he was the only one. So look, if there's 20 or 50 of you, you're going to run into trouble. There's no doubt about it. If there's 1,000 of you, not sure. It'll be, maybe a few thousand. They'll probably still disperse the crowd. They might, show a sense of a show of strength, or aggression. If there's 400,000 of you or more, well, as I say, I'm not inciting or encouraging anyone to do anything. I'm just postulating a hypothetical here. If there happens to be 500,000 or 1 million Melburnians standing in solidarity and unity, shoulder to shoulder, standing up for what you feel is right and saying we will not comply with unlawful, immoral actions, and you don't have ill will, you don't have bad intentions, or you're not out to harm or destroy. You're just there to stand for what you feel is right, and you want to make a statement to Dan Andrews, and you don't want to wait 2 years or whatever it is for the election. That could potentially be, hypothetically, a very powerful statement. And I would say that, regardless of what you guys decide to do, there is definitely going to be supporting satellite movements in every capital city around the country, I would have thought. I know there definitely will be in Queensland. And, we're all watching. We're wishing you the very best, a lot of strength and courage to go inside and find that strength and courage within you, and just trust in each other and yourselves, and know that, if your heart is in the right place and you're standing for your truth, standing for freedom and justice, that you will be protected, and we're all supporting you and wishing you the best, and we'll be with you every step of the way.
Well, thanks for those kind words, Matt. And I'm sure my audience members who are in Melbourne, there's quite a few in the chat who are Melburnians. We certainly appreciate your solidarity. And just going back to the Anzac spirit for a moment, we recently had VP Day victory in the Pacific there, the end of World War II, and of course the line is that they fought for our freedoms that we enjoy today. And of course, Melbourne was in lockdown at the time, and it was like, what freedom? We don't have freedom at the moment. And as you're saying, a peace and prosperity breeds a sense of complacency. The battle to keep freedom is eternal.
Yeah, indeed. Look, it's so important. It's so important, and it's very disingenuous to to have people in the government and the media saying things like it's not about human rights, it's about human life, and all these sort of rubbish catchphrases that Andrews is subjecting us to, making you feel selfish and trying to make people feel selfish, guilty, shame, all these type of psychological warfare techniques. To make you feel guilty for standing up for something which is of such vital importance, and it's so very, very important. To equate selfishness with doing that is quite wrong. And in my opinion, should really sound alarm bells for neutrals as to why what his intentions are for saying things like that. But it's. Just think for a moment about how how they were feeling in the trenches, and how they might feel if they would see the lack of freedom that we have in this country. And I understand and I appreciate and I know that there's some who feel that we're doing it for some sort of greater good, or that it's out of care for each other. But I just really encourage anyone who thinks that way to just do some research and just make sure you're sure that those actions are actually having that effect, because the science, even if you want to look at it that way, is just not necessarily supporting that point of view.
And your web address, well, it's pretty straightforward. It's truthandfreedomreport.com. Nice straightforward URL there where they can find more of your work. We'll wrap it up now. Again, thank you for coming on tonight. The audience has been very interested to hear what's going up in South-East Queensland as well. I don't want, given WilmsFront, I am a Melburnian, to be too Melbourne focused, but we are suffering the worst at the moment. Thank you to the audience again for their participation in the show. In Entropy, Beaver Anti-Bullying has got a question. Tim, can you get Sam Hansen on to talk about his Australian documentary, Battle for the Bank? This is more important than a fake virus that doesn't exist. I will look him up, Beaver Anti-Bullying. I know that you use Entropy to give me these suggestions, though you can email me as well. Me at Tim Wilms. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow night for the Uncockables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the show YouTube and D-Live. To my D-Livers, it's been great to be back tonight after a few episode absence. And then on Friday, Trad Tasman talk with myself and Dewey de Boer, myself from Lockdown Melbourne and him from Lockdown Auckland. We'll trade stories about how our week's been.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's been a pleasure. Thanks to everyone, and obviously I hope to see some of you come check out the website. You can obviously find me on any social media platforms, pretty much on everything. If you do sort of like anything that I've said, or appeals to you, just as a side note, if anyone's interested in sending me anything, anyone has something they would like to share in terms of a story, feel free to contact me. Whether it's I've got broad interests. Obviously, if you've had experience with anything to do with child sex trafficking and that absolute scourge on our society, that's a large focus for me. And you're more than welcome to relay some, any stories. If you're maybe nervous about going to the mainstream media and you want to speak to someone in the independent media to do a story like that, I'm all ears. Obviously, anything related to, freedom and fighting for freedom in our country. If you want to have a discussion about any legal or law aspects, that's an area of interest, and any types of sort of whistleblowing as well. If you work in the medical industry, nurses, doctors, professors, scientists in the academia, anything like that, I'm keen to hear from everyone. So that, look, we just got to get debate. We've got to get the expert voices. There's too much censorship. To me, censorship and banning, anyone, let alone expert testimonies, just because they don't agree with the mainstream narrative, is just not on. It's freedom of speech is our most basic foundational freedom, in my opinion. if you start banning speech, that is a slippery slope to totalitarian, authoritarian, dictatorship we don't want. And we need to get these voices out into the public. And if the mainstream media will do it, I am certainly one. Obviously, Tim's another, but I'm certainly one who is an open channel for getting that message out. And I do encourage anyone who would like to speak to me to please contact me through any of my social media channels. But Facebook's probably where I'm most active.
Yep, exactly right. And that's why I founded The Unshackled, to promote a message of freedom and also free speech as well. Take care, Matt. Good night, everybody. And thanks once again for all of your time. And I'll see you tomorrow night.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.